Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshops, where we gather together in the middle of the week and for some of us in the middle of the day, and we talk technology. My name is John Kennedy. I'm your host. Bill James is my co-host, always here to be able to help you with any kind of Zoom problems you might have. So if you have any of those, drop your chat box to him. During our presentation, Judy Delore is our question lady. And so all questions need to go to her because she's the one that asks them. So don't send them to me, don't send them to Bill, don't send them to the other John, send them to Judy for her asking them. Today, we've got a workshop that's kind of a branch off of one that we did a little while ago with Bill James when he talked about routers and modems and Wi-Fi. Today, we've got John Krout with us again, and we're so glad he's so willing to share with us many times. And he's going to be talking two different parts, talking about IP addresses and some important things that we need to understand about them. And then he's going to be talking about adding a storage device to your network, or as he'll be calling it, NAS, Network Attached Storage. John's from in the Virginia area near Washington from the APCUG group. And so we're so glad to have you here with us, John. We're just going to throw it over to you.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. I'll let you all know, got quite a crowd today, and I'll let you all know that John Kennedy and John Krout, the two of us, were in communication so frequently that we each call ourselves the other John K. And I want to give a shout out to Gabe. He joined the meeting. He is from the same user group, Pat Aces, here in Northern Virginia. Delighted to see his face once again. Now, I was originally contacted in order to arrange to show you the presentation on add NAS to your router today. But I also suggested, since so many people have so little familiarity with how IP addresses work, I proposed to Judy that I would also do an introduction to IP addresses. And I might add that this particular introduction is aimed strictly at beginners who have no idea what an IP address is or what it accomplishes for you. It is a very beginner level presentation. It's also necessary to understand when we get to add NAS to your router. Without this understanding, there's a pretty good chance that you will never be able to accomplish what we outline in add NAS to your router. So that's why we're going to do this one first. Now, having said that, I'm going to get the intro to IP addresses and port numbers running. Let's see here. I need to start that and advance one slide. Now, I'm about to share the presentation with you. And the first thing you're going to see is a totally blank slide. Do not panic. It does not mean Zoom has crashed. It does not mean that you're disconnected from the meeting. And it's only going to be up there for a moment or two. All right, and during that moment, I'm going to turn off a couple of things that might, under some circumstances, block your view of the slides. One of them is the video panel. I've removed that. And the other one is the floating meeting controls. There we go. And here we are, intro to IP addresses and port numbers. I haven't been a beginner for a long time, so it took me a while to figure out how to do this for you. But let's talk about why it's useful. First of all, you're going to learn how your computers, your smartphones, and your tablets obtain digital information for you from this thing we call the internet. Learn the role your router plays in that communication. It's a very vital role. Learn the role played by domain name servers. And believe me, that's very important too, because that means you don't have to remember IP addresses. When you give the computer a name like pataces.org, or for that matter, APCUG2.org, the domain name server converts that to an IP address. Learn how you can see the IP address of your computer, your smartphone, and your tablet. And many activities such as accessing streaming audio. Well, I used the word accessing twice there, didn't I? Streaming audio, streaming video, email, all of it depends on IP addresses under the covers. Most of the time, you don't need to know that stuff. And you can learn the jargon, maybe sound like an expert, or at least understand what the experts say when they talk about IP addresses. So here's the agenda: the world of connections in the sense of computers, client-server computing, we'll talk about that, the USPS analogy, the role of addresses. And this is really the key to understanding IP addresses. How to recognize an IP address, how to see your current IP address, like we said, on your tablet, on your phone, on your computer. And we'll talk about domain names and what's called DNS, domain name servers. The role of your router in all of this, I think we're going to explore that in some detail. Reserved IP address ranges, port numbers, and what happens when your phone leaves home and disconnects from your local area network. All right. So this is going to be no surprise. Much of what we do with our computers and other devices involves communication with other computers. Well, gosh, that should not be a surprise. We send and receive emails and text messages, browse the web, download things, watch streaming, listen to streaming audio or watch streaming video. I do a lot of that. Zoom meetings, what a surprise. Yes, that too. It's an example of connections between multiple computers. So when you start up an email app or a web page for viewing email, the app or the web page asks an email server application running on a server somewhere out there in the internet to send you the latest emails addressed to you. Now, this is an example of two computers working together. You ask for new email and the server on the other end sends the new emails to you. And when you compose a new email and tap the send button, the app or web page sends it to the email server of the recipient. These are all examples of client-server computing in which two applications on different computers work together to accomplish what you want to do. And that is the basis for almost everything we do with our computers, our phones, or our tablets when we are working with another computer. Now, we're going to talk about the U.S. Postal Service, something we all understand in one way or another. In some ways, what we've just outlined works like the U.S. Postal Service. The router in the U.S. Postal is like the U.S. Postal Service post office serving your neighborhood. And the computer or phone or tablet device is like a building within the post office service district. Let's see here. Now, the building street address enables the post office to deliver mail to the building. And the IP address in the analogy enables the router to deliver data to the devices and vice versa. When the computer wants to see email, that request goes out through the router to something outside the email server. And when the email server responds, it comes back through the router to your computer or tablet or phone. But there's one critical difference. The internet uses numeric addresses, numbers. All data on computer is stored as numbers, as you know. Applications have the smarts to interpret numbers either as text or images or sounds or video and so forth. To establish the greatest efficiency in computer communication, computers and smartphones and tablets each have their own address called an Internet Protocol address or IP address, and it is also numeric. This was designed in the very early days of computer communications. And in those days, nobody ever thought to give a name to a computer that could be understood by another computer. So instead, they gave each computer an IP address. IP addresses are used by one computer to send data to another. That's the shorthand for it. And that's what we're doing now through Zoom, although it's many computers, not just one. Now, what does an IP address look like? It's a 32-bit number expressed as 4 8-bit numbers. And here's, for instance, my desktop computer, which I'm using right now to talk to you. Its address is shown here. And my smartphone address is shown here also. Now, notice that these are identical except for the last 8 bits, and they're separating each group of 8 bits with a dot. So the first one there for my computer would be read 192.168.1.232 or 192.168.1.232. The value of each one of those 4 parts, the 8-bit parts of the 32-bit number, it ranges from 0 to 255 and is called an octet. And it's because the part is represented by 8 bits, otherwise known as 1 byte. The total number of valid IP addresses when you use a 32-bit number for each address is a bit more than 4 billion. Now, you know there's more people on this planet, and you know, at least in the United States, most people have more than one device. So 4 billion isn't all that many, but we're going to learn how, particularly with reserved IP addresses, the actual number can be expanded quite a bit and has been. But there are other devices that also use IP addresses, Roku and other video streaming boxes, smart televisions, especially if Roku is built in, or the high definition TV includes an app such as YouTube, like mine does, or Pandora. Some Blu-ray players also have apps built in, and in addition, they connect to the internet in order to download updates to their read-only memories, the permanent operating system, if you will. Vending machines. Now, you've probably seen these parking things that you use to pay for parking, or things that you use to buy a soda at a rest stop. They usually have an IP address and are connected to the internet for verifying those credit cards. Okay, now let's talk about how to see your current IP address. Here's the Android method. I did this using Android 12. You go to settings, you tap about phone, and then tap status information, and you scroll down the screen a tad bit, and I circled the IP address here for my phone. iPhone. I did this using my iPhone 10 and iOS 15. You go to settings and tap Wi-Fi, and what you're going to see is your current Wi-Fi network name, otherwise known as an SSID, appears at the top, and to the right of it, there's a letter I in a circle like I've shown you here. You tap that I in a circle for information. A new screen appears like you see here on the right. And you scroll down to find the IP address, and oddly enough, in this display, the router IP address is also shown, because it, like every other device on your network, has to have an IP address in order for the network to be able to tell them apart. In Windows 10, open the settings application, tap network and internet, and there is on the right a properties button, which I circled here for you. You click that, scroll down to find the IP address, and in addition, they list your router ordinarily, except for some of us, John. They will list the IP address of the router as your DNS server. And in a moment, we're going to talk about what DNS means and what it accomplishes for you. Okay. We, as humans, use domain names all the time. And there's a good reason for that. Domain names are far easier to remember than IP addresses. And here's some examples. My user group, pataces.org, cnn.com, gmail.com, apcug2.org. All of those are examples of domain names, and they are used both in web pages and in email addresses. And it might not be terribly surprising, but those domain names don't actually mean anything to your computer or your phone or your tablet or your router. They can't be understood because they are not numeric. But there is another server type called a domain name server, and it's a classic example of client-server behavior because you can submit a domain name to it, and what will it send back? It will send back the corresponding IP address. And that's how your computer ultimately is able to connect to other systems inside your network or outside on the internet, because we look up the corresponding IP address for each domain name. Now let's talk about the role of your router in all of this. It's a much more complex device than a simple provider of Wi-Fi to your home. It's typically a computer running the Linux operating system. The router has its own internal IP address. We've already seen examples of that. That means the address that is used on your local area network by your computer or your phone or your tablet to communicate with the router itself and with the outside world through the router, because the router is the only thing in your home that has a connection directly to the outside world, what we call the internet. Also, for most of us, your router assigns IP addresses to your connected computers, your phones, your tablets, etc. Most of the time, when you connect one of those devices, when you power up your computer or you bring your phone in from shopping or work, most of the time it will always assign the same IP address. Nonetheless, it's assigned. It is what we call dynamic. So your router is in charge of assigning those dynamic IP addresses to all the devices in your home. And because of that, some ranges of IP addresses are reserved for that use. And routers come with that reservation built in. Here's an example. Now, this happens to apply to my router because all the addresses that my router assigns start with 192.168. That 16 bits at the top of the 32-bit number is reserved for local use. And that means, for instance, that my router here is assigning addresses in that range, and my neighbor's router is also assigning addresses in that range. Here's another range, a bigger one. This is often used in data centers. Anything beginning with the number 10 is reserved. That can't be used out in the wide world to identify devices on the internet generally, but it can be assigned by a router to devices that are hooked up to that router. As I mentioned, my router assigns those addresses in the 192.168 reserved range. And each router does that, regardless of brand. That's how they're set up to do. Now, having said that, you can see that any one router could have a tremendous range of possible addresses that it serves as local or internal addresses. In fact, if my router could assign all of the numbers starting with 192.168 on my network, I could connect over 64,000 devices, and each one would get an IP address. I think it's actually 65,535. Now, having said all of that, my router can only connect 221. It's built in. I don't know why there's a limit, but it has something to do with the amount of memory that's available for keeping track of these things inside the router. I mentioned the router for your neighbor can assign the same address range as your router. So your neighbor's computer or phone or tablet might literally use the same IP address that yours uses on your network. And what's the difference? Your neighbor's on a different router. So that's like being, to use the USPS analogy, it's like being in a different zip code. You can have the same address in a different zip code, and there's no conflict or ambiguity. Just like 1000 Main Street is a valid and unambiguous street address in many cities and communities around the US. Now, one consequence of that, if each router can assign hundreds of IP addresses, is that the range of possible IP addresses is expanded far beyond the 4 billion limit. So if each router can assign 100 and all of those hundreds are used up, and there's, what, 50 million routers in the United States, well, you can figure out that it expands the 4 billion limit quite a bit. This idea of reserved IP address ranges that are used by routers is a very powerful one. Now, on top of all of that, your router actually has 2 IP addresses. The second one is called the external IP address, and it is assigned to your router by your internet service provider and is used for all communications with computers outside your home. Any computer that you contact, what they see as the return address is actually your router's external IP address, because that's the only one that is available to the world outside of your router. And likewise, when you send out a request for information, your router automatically substitutes its external IP address as the return address. And the router also keeps information that allows it to accept each incoming response from an email server or an audio server or a video server, so that it can direct the incoming information to the device that sent the request in the first place. All right, now we're going to talk about the role of port numbers. Your computer or phone or tablet can multitask and run more than one application simultaneously. Believe me, in the 8-bit days, when this was, well, something I knew about at work, but it wasn't possible at home, I was extremely jealous of the work environment where I had access to a multitasking Unix computer. But now, the Mac OS, Windows, and the Linux and Android devices can all run more than one app simultaneously. And it's a very powerful technique. And many of those apps, of course, use the internet in one way or another. Think of each application within your computer or phone or tablet as an office within that office building. And each office has what? Has a number. So port numbers act as the office address within the building, to use our USPS analogy. And port numbers have a range from 0 to 65,535. That's a lot of port numbers. But it turns out that the first 1,024 are reserved for specific purposes, such as email or web browsing or DNS. I happen to remember that port 80 is used for web browsing. These are called well-known port numbers, and they are reserved in the sense of nobody can use them for something else. I looked at a Wikipedia list of well-known port numbers. There were many for purposes, believe it or not, I had never heard of before, and others for familiar purposes, like I said, email and web browsing. Now there's a second group that actually occupies most of the port range that is called registered. And that means that specific applications are known to use those ports, but that does not make them reserved. Other applications can use the same ranges. Why would anybody register? It's to let you know, so that if you're a system administrator, you can figure out if there's any conflict with the applications already running on your system. For the rest of us, we don't care. All right, last subject on this topic. What happens when your phone leaves home? I happen fairly often to leave home with my phone running, connected to a streaming audio server for music. And what I find is I get about 150 feet away from my house in my car, and all of a sudden the music cuts off. There's a reason for that, because I had moved too far away from my home Wi-Fi, and my LAN IP address was no longer valid because I couldn't connect to the router anymore. So what happens in that case? Your phone is assigned a new IP address by your carrier service through the local cell tower. And when I disconnected from my home Wi-Fi, my phone was assigned by my carrier service this IP address, which didn't even slightly resemble what I had before on my LAN. And because of that, every application that you're running that involves communication with something outside of the phone, and that can include email, streaming audio, streaming video, whatever, must log in again. And that new login is usually done automatically, but it doesn't happen instantly. So my music was cut off for a couple of seconds until my phone was able to connect to the internet through the cell tower. And then it took a couple of seconds for my music app to log in again to the music server that was streaming music to me. 2.5 seconds. But then again, I only live a block away from the cell tower. So that's it. We're going to take a break for a moment. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them for you. But after that, we'll get to the main topic, add NAS to your router. So I'm going to end this presentation and stop my share. All right, do we have questions?
I have no questions in the chat box. That was extremely clear and understandable.
Well, thank you. I think most of us do understand at least the rudiments of how to use the Postal Service.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty useful analogy when we're talking about the internet and IP addresses.
Right. I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
When it connects to a cell tower, does that mean that it's data?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's what we, in my case, I have a phone that's 3 years old. In my case, it's 4G. But yes, it's data. In addition, of course, you're connecting for voice service when you connect to a cell tower. And as some of us have discovered, there's some parts of the US where the data service, although it's labeled 4G, is very low speed. The place where I go in West Virginia, a ski area called Canaan Valley. I go there in the summer times for a week of vacation. I get about 2 megabits per second of service on my phone there because there's only one cell tower serving a huge area. Here where I live, there's a cell tower every, 1,500 feet, something like that. And they have very high bandwidth connections to each cell tower. But then again, there's a lot of people using the cell towers. I can get pretty high speed service, except during rush hours, when thousands of cars are moving along US 29, a block from my home, and in between me and the cell tower. And then they're all connected and the service slows down a lot. So it varies, but yeah, that's how it works.
And then it gets expensive. Was the comment to what you are saying right now from the person who asked the question. 2 people asked the same question. Is there anything significant about the numbers 192.168.xx, blah, blah?
I wish I knew. I have looked at page after page after page on the web about this. When these things are created, they are usually done through a process that involves a proposal and what's called request for comment. And eventually there's some group that says, okay, we've had enough discussion, we've reached a consensus, this becomes some sort of a standard. And that was done, as far as I could tell, in the late 60s or early 70s. But I have not seen the documents that show the discussion. I have seen one web page that discusses a third address range. I believe that thing was old. It's either very old or very new, one or the other. But I've only found one. There's literally dozens of pages that discuss reserved IP address ranges, but only one where I found a third reserved range. There are also some individual reserved addresses. Like I said, the presentation itself was aimed at a beginner level of knowledge, not delving into the minutia.
My Android has an alphanumeric listed above the IP address. Is that typical?
Let's see here. You said your iPhone, is that correct?
No, he just said my Android. Sorry.
Android, okay. What I'm gonna do is go back here. Let's see here. Mine does too. I went back to the slide I showed how to see your Android IP address, and mine does too. Now, I believe, yeah, okay. That is what's known as an IPv6 address. And they decided for various purposes that they would expand the IP address range in several ways. And that what you're looking at there is what's called a hexadecimal numeric representation of the V6 address. But V6 is the next generation replacement for V4 IP addresses in order to expand it to something like the address range expanded from 4 billion to something like 132 trillion. I may be off a bit on that, but the idea was that we're going to be able to address all the devices on Earth, even if you have like milk cartons that have IP addresses to remind you to buy more milk. And then we can cover devices in space as well. So IP addressing is very powerful in that sense. Mr. Krout has his hand up, I believe.
Yes, indeed he do. It's his turn to talk.
Let me answer the question about 192.168.xx, 10.xxx, I believe 172. Something or other.
That's it.
All of those are designated as what's called non-routable IP addresses. They can never pass from one side of a router, and a router is something that connects two networks. Those addresses can never be passed from one side of a router to the other. Okay, we use them for local addresses, and for your home network, use whatever you please.
See, I knew there were going to be some experts on this call. I absolutely knew it. And that's why I qualified it multiple times. This is for beginners.
One other point that I'd like to make, and I don't know, I haven't seen the problem for a long time because I haven't been in coffee shops for a long time, but I prefer to have my home IP address to be something other than 192.168.0 or .1. Those are used by router manufacturers as defaults, okay? I used to run into a problem every time I went to a coffee shop and then came back home. I'd get an IP address at the coffee shop, come back home, and my home network would try to give me my computer would ask for the same address and couldn't get it back. So I simply took and chose a different third number. I used 104 because it was something I could remember. It was my street number when I was a kid. It follows all of the rules. So my home network is 192.168.104. something.
Absolutely. That's a very useful technique for the very reason that Mr. Krout described. It helps avoid conflicts when you come home and restart your computer and it tries to demand the same IP address that happens to be assigned to one of your other devices. I know this is a tricky thing. I know not everybody has run into the kind of problem that he described, but router administration, for the most part, is not something that I intend to give you an in-depth knowledge on today. We are going to touch on it during the next presentation, add NAS to your router. But it's only a very gentle introduction.
I have one more question and a statement. To the person who asked about a list of numbers, follow-up materials will be sent out, his presentation, Any links to URLs in the chat box will be included in that email as usual. Okay, Gabe, you get last raised hand, and then I'll get the last chat box question. Go.
Hi. Thank you, Judy. Thanks, John. Great stuff so far. I have a question going in the other direction. When I'm out with my phone and maybe I've just parked someplace and I want to do something on the phone before I go inside, and before the browser will let me do anything, the phone nags me with Wi-Fi addresses that I can connect to. And I have to say, and they're all secured, of course, so I can't use them. So I have to dismiss that, make it go away, and then the phone will connect to the cellular service that I want to deal with. Why is it doing that rather than just being the phone on the cellular network that I want to use? Why does it bother me with Wi-Fi networks that I can't use and don't want to?
Because you have Wi-Fi turned on is the short answer. If you turn off Wi-Fi in that environment, it will not bother you with that list of Wi-Fi networks you have no business connecting to.
But if I turn off Wi-Fi, then when I come home, I have to remember to turn it back on.
Right,
so it's
right.
sort of, you can lose this way or you can lose that way.
I agree with you. You have hit the nail on the head. And all I can say is they're going to have to make our phones even smarter than they are already in order for us to tell it things like, you know, we got to deal with that. But I see Mr. Trout has his hand up again. I'll bet you he's got another answer.
Talk to your cellular provider. That's a setting on your phone, whether it connects to data networks automatically, and you want it to do that. I never see anything like that.
Mr. Trout, are you using an iPhone or an Android phone?
An Android phone.
Okay, so Gabe, you're using an iPhone, aren't you?
Yes, he is.
I'm sure that the same thing holds true.
Yeah, well, it happens I've misplaced my iPhone 10, or I would be happy to start exploring how to set it in iPhone immediately. But Gabe can probably do that faster than I can anyway. Anything else?
Yes. Please discuss IPv4 and 6, IPv8 in the near future.
I have no information on IPv8. V4 is the version that has been used since before personal computers and routers existed for the home. But it's had a long history. It's always expressed the same way. V6, the basic reason behind V6 is to radically expand the number of individually identified devices on the internet. So instead of a limit of 4 billion, as I said, it's up there in a trillion somewhere with V6. This is the first occasion for me to hear that there is such a thing being considered as V8, so I can't comment on that. But obviously somebody is convinced either the way we express V6 is unwieldy, or we need a whole lot more than the trillions that are available through V6. And that latter reason, I'm a skeptic. All right, Judy, anything else?
Yeah, but it's irrelevant. Never mind. Isn't V8 a veggie drink?
Yeah.
That's someone who uses the APCUG logo as, you know, when they don't have their picture up there. So will not be made. Go on to your next presentation.
Okay. I was going to make a snide comment. There's actually 2 V8s for different products, and they've been in trademark litigation forever. Okay, so let's see here. I can kill intro to IP addresses. Let's get rid of that.
And so,
I'm trying to see.
And I have just a comment.
Mm-hmm.
there's a question about, are you a little too close to your mic and there's some audio distortion?
All right, I'm going to back up slightly. Does this sound better?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it does.
Okay, I need to turn down the microphone level in Zoom, and I will be happy.
I just turned my speaker microphone down and it worked for me. But yeah, no, you do sound better.
Okay, so let me get to audio. I know most of you don't know this background, but I did some acting, had the lead in 2 plays in middle school, and I've always been accused of having an actor's voice and a violinist's fingers. I have no defense. All right, so I need to start. What I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a preface on the presentation that we're going to do on add NAS to your router, because that particular presentation has a fair number of QR codes in it. And so what I'm going to do is show you a slide on how you can, and this is very short, set of slides on how you can use your phone or tablet to scan the QR codes in a presentation. So let me start that. Okay, I got that started, and unlike the prior one, it does not start on a blank slide. So I'll share that with you. Okay. And I'm going to have to turn off the floating meeting controls. There we go. Okay. So the presentation on add NAS to your router contains some QR codes. Now, this is a valuable thing for you because it can give you a quick way to access a web page, a PDF document, an app that you may want to install, or an email that you can send, or other valuable info. By scanning the QR code on your screen using your phone or tablet, you can access the info immediately without typing a URL and without typos. And you know from experience, the longer the password, the URL, the email address, the harder it is to type without typos. So QR code does that for you, as long as the creator of the QR code, me in this case, makes sure that it's done accurately, which I have for this presentation. Far faster than typing. The longer the URL, just to emphasize, the greater the advantage of QR code scanning, because you won't include your own typos. Now, get out your phone or tablet, because you're going to have an opportunity to practice scanning in just a minute. But first, you need to know whether or not your OS version running on your phone or tablet will support this activity, and I'm going to show you exactly how to figure that out. We'll see how to make sure your phone or tablet camera app is configured properly to scan QR codes. Now, it turns out it's built into Android 10, 11, and 12. And specifically, it's built into the camera app. So for those of you who have Android devices, open the camera app. The top of the app, you won't see I voted in Arlington, because of course I shot that here locally on my phone, but you will see the little bar at the top, the black bar with various icons in it. In that black bar, tap the gear button, which is in the top left corner. I circled it here for you to make it crystal clear. Now, when you do that, the camera settings screen opens, and it's going to look very much like what you see here below the image of the camera app itself. On that settings screen, make sure the scan QR code switch, which I circled for you, is turned on. That means it's in the right-hand position. If it's in the left-hand position, just tap it and it'll move to the right-hand position. Now, for some of you, that switch isn't there, and that means you're using an older version of the Android OS. But for those of you who have found that switch and turned it on, then tap the upper left corner with the left arrow to return to the camera app main screen. And be patient, because I'm going to be dealing with some of your compatriots who use other older operating systems. Now, in Android, because the switch is not there, open the Play Store on your phone or tablet. in the search field at the top, type QRBot, QRBOT. Tap the search button. The search results show this app. And notice it's got a blue outline with curved corners around a QR code. And it's called QRBot and it's published by TCAPS. That's the app you want. So tap the install button. Once it's installed, whoops. Oh, how did I do that? I'm going to have to resume the presentation here and go back to sharing the slide. Let's see here. That was in this one, and somehow I started the slide. I stopped the slideshow, so I'm going to resume it, and now I'll reshare it. All right. So, what I want you to do, if you have that prior version of the operating system on your Android phone, I want, once you have downloaded the app, start it and advance to the intro screens and stop when you see this button that says scan using the camera. Stop right there, wait patiently. I'll be back to you after I deal with our friends using iPhones. Okay, now on Apple, I did this using iOS 15 on my iPhone 10. Open the settings app, and what you're looking for is a search field like I circled here. If the search field is not visible, scroll down and up in the settings app slightly, and the search field will appear. Once you see it, type camera. And in the search results, you're going to see two different apps that have a camera icon next to them. One of them is camera, the other one's privacy. You want to select the camera app. And when you do that, when you tap the camera app settings screen opens like you see here. And if you're using a recent version of the iOS, then in the camera app settings, you will have a switch like I circled here called scan QR codes. And you want to make sure that switch is turned on, meaning it's on the right-hand side. If it appears on the left-hand side, tap it, and then it'll move to the right-hand side. So that switch is turned on. Now, if that switch is not present in camera settings, open the App Store on your phone. If the top of the screen does not display the search field, then tap the search icon in the lower right corner. In the search field, type QRBot. Now, this is where it gets a tad bit confusing. For some reason, the app has been renamed in the Apple App Store. It does not say the name is QRBot, but it looks like this when you find the right one. It's also published by the same publisher, TCAPS, T-E-A-C-A-P-P-S. It shows a QR code with a rounded green square around it. Tap the install button, which I circled for you, to install the app. Now, on your iPhone or iPad, when it is installed, the app name itself is QRBot. It's the same name for that I chose. In fact, it's the same publisher as well that I chose for older versions of the Android phone. So run that app, advance through the intro screens, and stop at the request for permission to use the camera. Stop at that point. Okay, so we've covered all four cases. Recent Android users, older Android users, recent Apple users, and older Apple users. So in two cases, we're using the camera, and in two cases, we're using the QRBot app. So for recent Android users, the camera app should be ready to take a photo. If it's not, or if you shut it down for some reason, restart it. Android QRBot users, tap the scan using the camera button now. Apple iOS 11 through 15 users, open the camera app if it's not open. And Apple QRBot users, in the QRBot app, tap OK to grant permission to access the camera. Do all of that. And we're going to show you a sample QR code that you can scan. This happens to contain the URL of my user group, the Potomac Area Technology and Computer Society. The actual address is www.pataces.org. It's not a long address to type, but it's also a very nice and non-threatening web page. So point your camera at this QR code. Like all QR codes, it has 3 squares in corners. That's how you can recognize a QR code. The app should recognize and scan the QR code. You do not have to tap a shutter button in order to make that happen. Okay, now the next steps. Once you scanned it, here's how you access the web page. So if you're using QRBot on Android, you're going to see a pop-up that looks like this. Tap Open Website, which I circled for you. If you're using the Android camera app, tap the pop-up below the QR code that says web address. If you're using Apple with QRBot, tap the web page address that I circled here at the top of the pop-up. And if you're using the Apple camera, it shows up at the top above the QR code. It's not very contrasty, but you tap the phrase website QR code, and it will open the pataces.org website in Safari. And that's it. Now you're ready. Aside from web pages, QR codes contain a lot of other useful information. A simple example is a V card, and that refers to all the data in a contacts record. And when you scan such a V card, the contacts info is inserted as a new record in your contacts app. So that's an easy way. What I recommend, honestly, is that anybody who has a business card should put a QR code for the business card info on the on the business card. Makes it far easier to get it into your contacts app. It means you don't have to retype. It's also possible to embed an entire email in a QR code, and that would include the to line, meaning the addressee, the subject line, and text body. And that opens, when you scan such a QR code, it opens the email app on your device so that you can modify and send the email. And that's very useful for events like this, where we could publish a QR code and it would send, open the, well, no, that's not for events like this, I'm sorry. A URL would be best for events like this, because in order to register for this event, you had to use the forms in Google. But there is another one, and I find this to be immensely valuable, a Wi-Fi login QR code, which connects your device to that Wi-Fi. And that means it's got the Wi-Fi name and the password embedded. And of course, it only works if you happen to be within range of that particular Wi-Fi network. But to give you an example of how useful this is, one of the networks available to us where our computer club, Pataces, meets, has a very long, complicated 32-character password. It's very easy to make mistakes when you type it. And they have switched to displaying the entire information as a Wi-Fi login QR code that you can scan, so you don't have to type the thing. And they change that password every 4 months. So it's a real pain to type, and you have to do it fairly frequently. But using a Wi-Fi login QR code, anytime the password changes in a network you use, or anytime a new member or prospective member comes into your club meeting, that Wi-Fi login QR code can be immensely valuable. And it saves a lot of frustration. There are many other types also. I mentioned those 3 because I think they're especially useful to computer clubs. Okay, that's that presentation. I'm going to stop that share, and we will go ahead and get started on NAS in just a moment. First, I want to close that slide deck because I don't need it anymore. Let's see here. Okay, now let's get the final one going. All right, for some reason I don't have it open, so I'll get it opened again. Yep. All right, now. Here we go. I'm going to start on this current slide. Excellent. Okay, it's on my screen. Now I have to share it with you. Okay. So this is called Add NAS to your router. I did this a couple of months ago for my computer club as a brand new topic. And I found it was pretty well received. So I suggested it to Judy, and as a result, here we are seeing it again today. Now, you all have a pretty good idea of what your router can do. You may not know where it is in your house, but I think you could probably find it pretty easily. But we're going to talk about NAS and what that means. And here it is. NAS is network attached storage. What does storage mean? Hard drive, flash drive, solid state drive, or a more complex device such as a NAS RAID. Just like a 1990s era Novell server used in offices all over the US at the time, NAS is a storage that anyone logged onto the network can use to create folders, store, and retrieve files or entire folders. As an example, on my NAS last night, I stored today's presentation just in case my computer crashed. I could retrieve it and run it from my laptop if I need to. Pre-Novell, most offices were reduced to sharing files by sneakernet, meaning diskettes or flash drives or email. Any USB drive will work for purposes of connecting to your router. A USB drive will work if it's a solid state drive or hard drive or a flash drive. NAS in the 2020s today can be accessed via Wi-Fi on portable devices such as your tablet or your phone, as well as via Ethernet or Wi-Fi through a computer. Now, what are the advantages of NAS? Why should you care? Shared files that are too big to send via email, such as videos, work fine on NAS. And sharing big groups of files, such as photos of a vacation in a NAS folder, that works fine too. Sharing with other devices on your network, which is really the reason that I use it, because it's a very convenient and fast backup opportunity away from my computer. So if my computer crashes, I still have access to the data on the NAS. And that's why, as I say, I find it so valuable for backups. And I might add, it's faster than cloud storage. So if you're ordinarily using OneDrive or Google Drive or iCloud to store things, you may find that it's much faster to do that on your NAS as compared to your cloud storage. So we're going to talk about several things: how to attach NAS to your router, what your router needs to have on it in order to make it useful for this purpose, storage devices that can become NAS. Well, we've just outlined them in a nutshell. How to configure Windows. Now, this is where I think this presentation really delivers value for you. How to configure Windows File Explorer to see NAS and access it, like you access a local solid state drive or hard drive or flash drive. How to configure iOS Files app on your iPhone or your iPad to see NAS and access files. And yes, I mean full access, read-write. How to configure Android My Files, which is an app you can download, a free one, to access NAS. Unfortunately, I don't have the information for Macs because I don't have a Mac. I've been toying with the idea of spending money on that, but I'm retired and my income is necessarily a bit limited, so we'll see. And finally, as I always say, learn the jargon and sound like an expert, but more importantly, learn the jargon and be able to ask questions if you need help at your user group, so you'll be able to understand the answers from the experts. Now, here's some more jargon. RAID, I mentioned this previously. RAID is a redundant array of inexpensive disks. Now, that word inexpensive is, how can I put this diplomatically? Relative. RAID offers two big advantages: a fast file and folder retrieval speed and very flexible backups. Why is retrieval fast? It's because each file is divided across 2 or more hard drives, and so each part of the file can be retrieved concurrently and delivered to your computer, far faster than any single drive can do the same work. Very reliable backups, because files are distributed redundantly across the disks in a RAID. So if one disk dies, the other disks still contain all the information for any file, and you can continue to retrieve it. Products are sold by Micro Center. Oddly enough, if you search NAS on the Micro Center website, every device that they provide as a search result is a RAID. Now, some of them cost as much as a computer. In fact, there's one empty cabinet where you have to put in the hard drives on Micro Center that costs $2,300. So as much as a computer? No, as much as 3 or 4 computers. But you can also use any single hard drive or solid state drive or USB flash drive as NAS. NAS really refers to how the storage is connected via your network to computers, not how storage is organized internally. RAID refers to how storage is organized inside the RAID cabinet. So in sum, any USB storage device can be NAS. Here's another little bit of network jargon that has become, fairly widespread in the past few years. Mesh is a router technology that allows multiple routers to work together seamlessly and act as a single router within your house. Because there are multiple routers involved, you can put one on each floor. If you're in a long rambler, you can put one at each end and one in the middle. The basic advantage is to improve Wi-Fi reception anywhere it is weak when using a single router. And some are sold as mesh sets. They're usually pretty expensive, $400 and up. Others are standalone routers like the one I have, which is mesh capable, but I would have to buy standalone nodes and enable mesh behavior on my master router. And so far, mesh does not work with 2 different router brands. That's just something that's important to remember in case you need to use mesh for your home. So somehow I inserted that slide twice. Now my background and my particular router is a Linksys MR8300. I've been buying Linksys routers for about 20 years now for use in the home. Started with one that was, I think, providing Wi-Fi B and G, and now it's up to N with multiple frequencies. I prefer Linksys over the routers provided by Fios and cable companies, in part because I understand the Linksys administration interface. Generally speaking, I found that when you get one from your internet service provider like Fios or Cox or Comcast, it's really a pretty opaque device, difficult to administer. Now, I got to admit, the American plan is that when you open the box for your router and you find the disk that has maybe the router administrative guide on it, that's probably the last thing you pay attention to. Since I already had a pretty good idea of how to administer Linksys routers, although the methods have changed over the years, I didn't want a company to lock me out of router administration. And I use FiOS here where I live, and they've occasionally put pressure on me, particularly when I upgrade the speed to get one of their routers, and I tell them, take a hike, because knowledge always wins out. Now, let's talk about NAS and how to attach it to your router. And this is the key. Many router brands and models now have a USB port in addition to several internet ports. Here's an example on the MR8300. Here's the back of the unit. You see the power and the power switch on the right. You see a connection for the internet, followed by 4 Ethernet connections, and then 1 USB 3.0 socket. And, you know, I didn't pay much attention to that when I first set up the router. But the router USB ports originally were intended to attach a printer to the network, so the printer could be used by all devices on the local area network. Now the USB port can power any USB storage device and make it available as network attached storage. That could be a flash drive, a portable solid state drive, or a portable hard drive. Any of those things, even a self-powered RAID cabinet. Now, I haven't done the latter. I actually started out with a 32 gig flash drive as my first NAS, simply to test it. It's very inexpensive. In fact, these days, you can get one of these. This is a USB 3.1, 256 gigabyte flash drive, sold at, and I checked the price again yesterday, sold at Micro Center for 20 bucks. And that's a pretty good test device. And actually, for many people, it would serve as all the NAS they ever need. So how do we get started? Well, first of all, you have to check your router. In particular, you have to check the back of the router. Is there a USB port on your router? If not, you're out of luck unless you buy a NAS RAID, which is a lot of bucks, or a new router, which is not so many bucks. Check your router dock to see if your router USB port will support a NAS storage device. If it does, it will specify the format of the NAS storage device, because they don't support every possible way of organizing information on a flash drive or a hard drive or a solid state drive. So you may find that they list a couple of options. In my case, it was NTFS and FAT32. Those two different formats were supported, or at least the docs said they were supported by my router. And make sure your NAS device is formatted that way using your computer before you attach it to your router, because your router cannot format for you. Now, I had an interesting experience when I attached my 32 gig flash drive to my router, because it was already formatted FAT32. And although my router docs said that FAT32 would work, it didn't work. The router did not recognize the device as NAS storage. So I ended up reformatting for NTFS, and when I attached it that way, it did recognize the NAS storage. This is the flash drive I just showed you. Some of you live close enough to Micro Center that you could make a trip over there to buy one. Now, there are smaller ones available, and you can buy a smaller one if you prefer as an initial test, or you may have one on hand for that matter. Format the USB drive as required by your router dock. Plug it into your router USB port, and check to see if your router recognizes your USB flash drive. The way you do that varies depending on the router brand and to some extent on the router model, the way you do the check. Now, it turns out for the last few years, Linksys, in addition to offering the traditional web page-based administrative capability for Linksys routers, they offer a free app. And here's the icon for the app. And what I found when I attached external storage that was recognized by the router, when you look at the app, you open it and its dashboard shows down near the bottom of the screen, the router external storage. If it doesn't recognize it, that heading external storage will not appear. If it does recognize the storage, then it will identify it. Now, the phrase living room is a little bit of confusion here. For some reason, Linksys likes to identify things by where they are located in my house. And yes, my router is in the living room. But in any event, when it says external storage, it's telling you it's connected to your router. If the USB drive is not connected or the router does not detect it, then the external storage heading will not be there. I just mentioned that. It's just for additional emphasis. Just by the way, if you do own or buy a Linksys router, you can download the Linksys app. Here's the link for the Android app on the Play Store. If you scan this QR code with your Android device, this will open the Play Store to the web page for the Linksys router administration app. And likewise, if you scan this other QR code with your Apple device, it will open the App Store on your Apple device to the web page for the Linksys router administration app that I just showed you. Okay, now, earlier in Introduction to IP Addresses and Ports, I showed you how to identify your router IP address, the internal IP address. And you need to know that in order to accomplish the harder stuff, which is configuring your other devices to use the NAS. The router IP address is normally found in the router doc. You can, if you are an advanced user, such as Mr. Krout, you can configure the router IP address, the internal address, to be different than the one that is there by default. In my case, the default was 192.168.1.1. Pretty easy to remember, at least if you've been working with this stuff for 20 years like I have. And I bought, oddly enough, they had a sale at Micro Center. I bought a second MR8300 about 3 years after I bought the first one. And oddly enough, its internal default address is 10.157.1.1. Now, that's obviously a reserved address range, and I have no idea why they changed it between the first version of the router and the second version, but they did. So and as I said, if you really know what you're doing and you have a reason, then you can reconfigure that default IP address if you wish. Okay. It turns out if you have a Linksys router and you use that router administration app, you can tap the top heading where it has an icon for the router itself, and this screen opens, and by golly, down at the bottom, it has the router IP address. So that's a good way to confirm it, in addition to the ways I showed you in Windows 10 and in the iOS in the prior presentation. Another way, okay, if you have what you suspect is the correct number, you can open a command prompt window in Windows and ping the IP address. And I've circled the command that I used to ping my new router. And here's an example of a successful ping. So that is an additional confirmation. For those of you who are using a Pi device with you can open a bash window and do the same thing, or Linux for that matter. And I'll just review this quickly to see your router IP address. Is it the same couple of slides that I showed in the prior presentation? Okay, now we're going to talk about Windows File Explorer and how to connect that to the router NAS. Let's see here. You know, I don't really have that quite organized the way I wanted, but here we go. In Windows File Explorer. When you open it, ordinarily it's organized as two panes. There's a pane on the left called the navigation pane, which has a tree of folders in it. If that doesn't show up, then you click on this button in the upper left corner below the word file, and a menu appears just below the button. Now let's back up so we can see that. I didn't circle it, but in the just below the button, the very first choice in navigation pane, you just allows you to either turn it on or turn it off. If it's off, you need to turn it on. So it's binary. You just click on it to change its state. And so if you're not seeing it, if you're not seeing the navigation pane in File Explorer, this is how you can turn it on. And once you do that, you will see the nav pane on the left and the content pane on the right, like I've indicated here. And at the very top, there's a heading called Quick Access in the navigation pane. Slide the navigation pane vertical scroll bar, which I circled here, all the way down to the bottom. And on my Windows 10 PC, network is at the very bottom of the navigation pane. Click network in the navigation pane. Network then appears in the path field up here at the top. Now, I don't show it appearing yet here, but you will see that in place of this PC when you click on network. You may also see things in the content pane at the right, such as your router and other network devices. In the path field that has the word network in it, tap that word and type this. Now, you have to know your IP address of your router. You're going to put that in, starting with 2 backslashes, like I've depicted here. So don't necessarily use the address I've shown you here, because it may not be the correct address for your router. You need to use the correct address for your router. The path field then changes and it reads network and then the address of your router. And when you do that, the content pane will change to show your new NAS. And I've circled it here. Okay, now you found it. Now we're going to show you how to make it findable every time you open File Explorer, so you don't have to repeat this stuff that I just taught you. In the content pane, right-click on your new NAS. A menu will appear like you see here. And notice the menu item that's in white says Pin to Quick Access. In the menu, select that choice, Pin to Quick Access. Now, what that does is park a link to your new NAS in the Quick Access menu in the navigation pane. And you can move it around. You can put it where it's most convenient for you to use by dragging it up and down in the navigation pane. Now, once it's there, it'll stay. That's what Quick Access is all about. And then you can access it whenever you need to access it simply by clicking on it, and it will show you the files and folders inside your NAS. All right, Android. Android, there's no app on your phone that will directly allow you to access the NAS, but there is a free app you can download, and guess what? I'm going to show you how to download it. It's called My Files. It works a lot like Windows File Explorer. It's published by Samsung, and it will work on all Android devices. It is also free on the Play Store. Its icon looks like this that I've shown you here on this slide. You install the app, and you can access it by scanning the QR code if you want. That will, when you scan it, it will automatically open the Play Store to the page on which Samsung My Files appears. And when you install it on your phone, it'll be called My Files. The app title on the App Store is Samsung My Files, but you can install it by, and once you do, it's called My Files, and the icon looks like you see here. All right, now, for iOS, you have an app on your phone that will do the same job. It's called Files, on your phone and on your tablet, for that matter, on your iPhone and your iPad. So it's built in, and it's pre-configured to access some cloud storage, particularly iCloud. It can also be configured to access Google Drive and OneDrive and other cloud storage systems. You'll learn how, today, you'll learn how to connect the app to your NAS on your network. Now, for my iPhone 5, which is very old, and it's limited to running iOS 10.2.4, I installed the free Remote Files Basic app. I am not going to teach you how to use that app today, but if you are running something prior to iOS 11, you may need that app instead of the app that's now built in to the current iOS. So there I've given you a QR code so that you can open up the App Store directly to the page for Remote Files Basic. Okay, so for the rest of you with the current iOS, open the Files app, and in the upper right corner of the Files app screen, tap the 3-dot icon, which I circled here. Since it's 3 horizontal dots, we sometimes call that the ellipsis. A menu pops in, and it looks like this, and you'll notice that it has several choices in it. What we're going to do is choose the choice called Connect to Server. I circled it, and when you do that, there's a screen that pops in, and it looks like this. And the screen contains a single field. It's very simple. A single field named Server. And as you can guess, given what you see on the screen, you need to type the IP address of your router, and then you tap the Connect button in the upper right corner. It's really not very difficult, but you have to get that address correct. All right, now, there are actually 2 different ways to configure access to NAS. One is with a password, and the other is anonymous, otherwise known as guest. And since at the time I installed this, my son was the only other user here in my home, I decided to eliminate the security and simply use the anonymous login, which here is called guest. So you tap that choice, and then tap the next button in the upper right corner. And at that point, you're going to see a screen that looks like this, the browse window, and it shows your NAS. And you can, if you want to see it immediately, you can tap the NAS icon to see NAS files and folders, and to read and write full privileges. You tap the browse button in the upper left corner to return to the top level browse screen, and this is what you're going to see once you've added your NAS. It's going to show up below cloud drives in the screen, and it will show up with the network address of your router. And you can tap it to access NAS at a later time, whenever you're connected to your local area network. Now let's talk about what the Files app can do. You can long tap on any file or folder to see a menu of Files app actions. The available actions include rename, duplicate locally, copy, move, and delete. And in addition, if you choose copy or move, then use the Files app to open another folder in which to paste. You can choose paste once you get to that other folder. Long tap any blank area in that other folder, and paste appears in a pop-up menu, so you can select paste to paste the things you copied into the new folder. Now we're going to look at Android and My Files. You open the My Files app, and you're going to see local storage listed and any in my case, some other things to which I connected, Google Drive and OneDrive. And then it has a heading called network storage, which I've circled here for you. And scroll to the bottom of the screen, find and tap the heading network storage. And you can guess you're going to go through just about the same behavior that we went through on iPhones. Tap the add button in the lower right corner, which is not shown here, and type the router IP address. As you can see, when you do that, it will show you any NAS that is attached to that IP address. My file showed the NAS found at that IP address on my network. And in the main My File screen, you can tap router IP address and NAS name to see the file anytime in the future, to see the NAS anytime in the future. Tap that NAS name to see the files and folders in it. And likewise, you can do things like delete files, copy files. To do that, you long tap a file or folder and you'll see a list with circles to the left, and you can select more than one thing that you want to apply an action to. And the actions include details, rename, open with, and open a new window. Move, copy, share. These are all represented too at the very bottom of the screen with icons that I circled here. You can also check mark multiple items and apply any action item, any one of the actions, to all selected files and folders at once. Once you do that and you move to a new folder, then you can select, first of all, it'll show you how many items you selected in a gray bar, and to the right of the gray bar, there's the words copy here. And you don't have to tap that until you've gotten to the right folder where you want to copy things to. So you navigate to the destination storage folder. It can be on your device, or it can be elsewhere on the NAS, or maybe you have multiple NAS on your network. You can copy from one to another. And there's also a choice for move here. And the selected files and folders will appear in the destination storage folder. And that's it, folks. So once again, we're going to take some questions. Let me just terminate the presentation. There we go. And all right, Judy, hit me.
I will right now. What multi-drive backup device do you recommend?
I can't recommend any because I've never tried them. But I do, let me comment on my backup strategy. I have two 128 gig metal constructed flash drives that I also, every time I do a presentation, every time I prepare for a presentation, I copy the presentation to these two flash drives. One of them is a Lexar flash drive, and the other one's a SanDisk flash drive. And I also copied to two portable hard drives, and I copied to my NAS. So rather than having one multi-drive system to which I connect things, I back up to several different places. And very important, 4 of those 5 places aren't normally connected to anything. Now that means if for some reason lightning hit my network and fried everything on my network, I would still have the data in those drives that are not connected to anything. So that's been my strategy for a long time. Now, there's a difference between copying a few megabytes, which is typical for my presentations, or the roughly 2 terabytes of digital photographs that I have on my computer. And I have that on an internal hard drive. I have that on 3 external hard drives. And those are mostly unattached to the computer for the same reason. If something catastrophic hits my network and every computer and the router, they all go down, and my hard drives that are connected to the computer are completely fried, then I still have the photos. But that's been my strategy. And I might add that it's a lot faster than backing up photos to a cloud storage.
Okay. Have you used open source router software? If so, do you like it?
There are some versions of the Linksys router line that are built to accept open source software. And in particular, although I'm gonna give you a caveat on this. One of the things I've considered doing, but I haven't done, is installing virtual private network software on the router. Now, there's a couple reasons to do this. One is that it automatically gives virtual private network advantages to every device connected to the network, such as your computer, your phone, your tablet. And the way that, just by the way, the whole way that works, the basic underpinning, the foundation of a virtual private network is what's called asymmetric encryption, which means you use one password to encrypt and a different password to decrypt. That was invented by a professor at MIT named Ron Rivest and two of his colleagues. They were aiming at a completely different problem. It was to verify the authenticity of email, particularly who sent it and who it was intended for. He did that long before the web was invented, and yet we use it now every time we use a URL that begins with HTTPS, which means secure. Now you do that when you're accessing your bank, your stockbroker, and lots of other websites. It's all based on work Ron Rivest delivered to the world. You've heard of this company called RSA. It stands for Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman. They commercialized the invention and made a ton of money off of it. But the point is that it provides more security than any single password system has ever been able to provide. And it works especially well on the web. What a VPN does is encode all 100% of your message traffic moving in and out of the internet. And the only device that can decode it is what's called a VPN server, and you get to choose. Do you want to use, most services have multiple VPN servers available. There's, for instance, the one we signed up for has one in Seattle, has one in London. That's especially useful if you have Netflix, because there's some things that are on Netflix in Europe that aren't on Netflix in the United States. And so if you log in and Netflix says you're logging in from this server in London, you get the freebies. And there's servers on every continent except maybe Antarctica. Now, the bad news. What happens to the speed of your internet traffic when you use a VPN? Well, I tried it and I found out. You lose a lot, maybe as much as 70% of your internet speed by using a VPN. So will that change if you put it on a router? No. But at least you won't have to live with the limits imposed by your VPN provider, because they may limit the number of devices on which you can install a VPN client. So if you can install it in one place on your router, you've dodged that limit completely, at least for devices in your home. You may still need to use it if you're outside the home, but be aware, you pay a speed penalty for using VPN. I know that went a little bit far afield. Judy, what was the original question? Let me make sure I addressed it.
Have you tried open source stuff?
Well, there are, oddly enough, open source VPN applications you can install on certain routers that are built to accept those things. And some VPN services will even sell you a router with it already installed. But that's a little bit different from using a multiple drive NAS. So I apologize for getting off on a tangent, but the short answer is no, no, I haven't actually tried it. I know that those things exist. They may exist for other purposes too. Those I haven't looked into, but when I first signed up for VPN, I did look into installing VPN client on a router and found that yes, many VPN services do sell routers with it pre-installed.
Can you connect a USB hub with multiple drives attached?
I know people who have done that. I know the other John Kay is planning to do that. He hasn't done it yet. It's not terribly difficult to do physically, of course. There's such things as powered USB hubs, and you can attach multiple storage devices there, but I haven't done it. So no, I can't really give you much information on that.
Can we copy entire folders to a storage device without opening and highlighting the individual files?
If the files you want to copy are all in a folder, you can copy the folder. But that's the fastest way I know to do that.
Absolutely. Can you encrypt NAS back when formatting to use your router for backup?
I haven't tried it. I don't know.
Okay, how do you find your phone's username? Your iPhone's username?
You know, as I said, I've
With an
misplaced.
iPhone, can you answer that?
Yeah, maybe Gabe can do that one.
Gabe Goldberg, do you know the answer, or could you look that up for us?
He might not be actually on the meeting. He might be away from his desk at the moment.
Well, we've been chatting back and forth. He's had a couple of other things.
I've been listening, but I missed that last question. What's the question about?
How do you find your iPhone's username?
Well, let me go grab the iPhone, which is downstairs, and talk among yourselves while I fetch the iPhone.
Okay, I'll just ask another question. Is your NAS, how do you protect it from ransomware?
Well, okay, ransomware. The basic purpose of your router is to prevent intrusions. And if it allows intrusions of that nature, whoever configured your router really ought to be at fault and pay for it. Routers are specifically designed so that nothing can come to you unless your device asks for it. Now, the one nice thing about putting NAS on your system is that it never asks for anything. For ransomware to come in, you have to access something that turns out to be based on or deliver ransomware. Now that might be a web page, might be clicking in an email. So it ultimately really depends on the vigilance of your brain and whatever protection scheme, Norton or whatever that you have installed on your computer. But the point is, it won't come in unless somebody allows it to come in.
So watch where you're clicking on and watch where you're going.
Absolutely. Personal vigilance plays a huge part in this.
And Gabe is back. You're
Right.
on, Gabe.
If I understand the question, if you go into settings and tap general and tap about, at the very top of the about screen, you'll see a name. And if that's what was meant by user ID, then that's where you find it.
Yeah, I think, Gabe, the key point is if you're using My Files or the Files app on iOS, what name would show up in that app for your device? And really the question is predicated on, I have more than one iOS device. So how do I tell them apart? I think.
Oh, we don't know. A comment. My modem required turning SMB1, obsolete protocol, back on in Windows 10 to access storage.
All right, let's talk about that. SMB is often pronounced Samba, and it stands for Server Message Block. That is the underlying technology that is used for accessing NAS between your devices on your local area network. It has nothing to do with your modem. If you turn that on, it means that you're accessing cloud storage from inside your network or your network storage from outside your network. And that's what SMB is used for. All those different ways of obtaining access to your NAS are fundamentally built on server message block technology, which is software. But beyond that, if you say you had to adjust your modem, it's inevitably because you're accessing some storage somewhere through that modem. And that's not NAS on your router unless you're trying to access it from outside your network.
Okay. Are the flash drives security safe when we buy them new?
I have never found anything on the flash drive other than an app from the flash drive maker that encrypts the flash drive. And I don't use those because it slows them down. So the short answer to that is yes. Now, the easy thing to do, you plug it into your computer and format it. And that gets rid of everything that, you might consider questionable.
Another comment. Samsung My Files app on Google Play Store says it is not compatible with my Android Motorola One Action phone with Android 10. Is there a different file app for NAS access that might work?
I think so, because My Files isn't the only thing out there. I will say that I have heard more complaints about incompatibility with that brand of phone than any other Android phone that I've ever had occasion to hear about. But typically when you search for one app, you're going to find that the Play Store will list a number of others that do similar things. So I think you can count on the Play Store to help you out there.
What are some of the files you store on your NAS?
Well, now.
Would that be everything?
Oh, no.
Okay.
For one thing, ultimately, I ended up with a 500 gigabyte drive. Sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Especially for those of us who can remember the bad old days. But when you've got terabytes of photos, you don't attempt to store them on a 500 gigabyte drive. So let me go click on here I'm running File Explorer. I know you can't see it, but I'm going to click on there it is, Samsung T7. So I've got a folder for every user group that I've done a presentation for in the last several months, and all the files needed for that presentation, and some of the development files like the screen captures. I've got an MP4 of a funeral at Arlington National Cemetery that I shot on behalf of one of my high school classmates whose father was buried there a year ago. And I've got some of the PDFs that I use, in particular a PDF for my Canon strobe flash that I use in my Canon SLRs. And I also, my son posted on that a list of songs that he thought that were appropriate for my playlist for Christmas time. That playlist was running 24/7. I was streaming it from my computer using the free VLC application to other devices that were set up to listen on my local area network. And that included some of my retired phones that I had plugged into speaker systems around the house. Subject for a future presentation.
So it's kind of stuff that's important to you.
Yes. And things I don't want to lose.
Right, absolutely drop dead no matter what, because he's keeping all of his presentations for his kids to watch when he's no longer here.
Yeah, even if I completely lost power, I could unplug that NAS and I could take my flash drives and hard drives and I'd have multiple copies of the next presentations that I need to do. And I can take that off to the library or any place else that I can find public Wi-Fi. And then I can do the presentation.
Okay.
Although the library is probably a bad example because it's talking is not a good idea, but you understand the principle.
Can you speak to your approach to security, given that a NAS is accessible from anywhere inside and outside of your network?
My approach, I missed one word. My approach to what? Security.
Yes,
okay.
Security.
Well, good question. The key factor for visitors who may be my son's visitors in particular, my son's now 31 years old, or he will be in November, is how savvy are they?
Mm-hmm.
And the key risk there is that my son tells them about it. And then, you know, they figure out, well, they've got an iPhone with files, or they've got an Android phone and they download my files, and then they got access to the NAS, because it's not hard to find once you use one of those apps, or for that matter, a laptop with the File Explorer on it. So, you know, I told my son, I said, don't tell him about this. Now he's moved out, so I don't have that risk anymore. But let me point out another thing that I discovered, oddly enough, last night, because I was using my files on my Android tablet, and I noticed that several different devices were visible, networked devices, or at least I could contact them, and they weren't secure. One of them was a listing for an LG OLED TV. Now, I'm a fan of LG TVs. I have a couple of them, including a 4K TV that I think is the cat's meow and only cost me $300. But here's the point. None of them use organic LEDs. So what I was seeing was that my tablet could connect to and cast a television image to an OLED TV owned by one of my neighbors. That is definitely a very insecure situation on my neighbor's part. And what I would do if I were in that situation is turn off Wi-Fi on the TV. Now, they may have a Roku box that's hooked up to Wi-Fi, and I could cast to that. But if they hook up the Roku instead to Ethernet, then I won't be able to cast to it because its Wi-Fi will be turned off. And I happen to know that because I have a Roku box that's hooked up by Wi-Fi to my network, not by Wi-Fi, by Ethernet. So there are ways to deal with these things. And lucky me, I got to learn of it by seeing the insecurity of my neighbor's television. I was thinking, did I buy an organic LED TV? No, I did not. So guess what? And I even know which neighbor it is, because I was at one end of my house very close to the house next door. It wouldn't let me get into their network, but boy, can you imagine somebody throwing up a picture of their kids on your TV without your permission? I mean, that alone, that makes me cringe. So we're becoming more connected, not less connected.
Mm-hmm. Could you create an area on your router where your guests could only get to certain places and they couldn't get any place that you did not want them to go?
I think so. I have not tried that myself, but it seems to me that you might be able to add a password to some of the folders and not others, and that would potentially serve that purpose. Again, I'm speculating because I haven't actually tried it.
That's a Bill James question. Are you using the NAS as an alternative to cloud storage?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I have, because I subscribe to Microsoft 365, I have a terabyte of storage on their cloud. That's called OneDrive. I have 15 gigs on each one of my various Google accounts. And that I use primarily for file transfer, large files, gigabyte files. But I know from experience that if I transfer something to cloud storage, it takes far longer than transferring it to the NAS. So although most of the things I put on the NAS are kind of small, I have some videos up there that are in excess of a gigabyte. And boy, having the NAS makes a huge difference comparing it to, and I might add, I'm no slouch in terms of my internet connection speed. My upload speed typically tests out at 350 megabytes per second, megabits per second. And that's pretty fast. And so I can, it's not like I have a 50 megabit upload speed. There would be no question I'd be putting everything on NAS, and I'd probably buy a bigger NAS than I have now. But for some purposes, cloud storage is valuable. As I say, primarily file transfer to other people. But I still think that even a terabyte in my case isn't really enough. And I don't routinely copy my photos to any cloud storage, partly because I can't get enough cloud storage, and partly because no matter what they tell you, if you read the legalese, there's no guarantee that it's going to be there when you need it. They will make their best efforts, and frankly, they're under a lot of competitive pressure to make sure that it's always there and available to you and always secure. But that doesn't mean it's perfectly secure and perfectly available. And they have no guarantee that you're going to be able to, that either of those things will be true in the indefinite future. That's why that's another reason why I like NAS. I've got control.
What is your opinion of combined NAS router / server devices?
Well, thus far, I've been very happy with NAS on my router. There is one little teeny tiny little gotcha. And that is, I have yet to find a way, and boy, I have tried some indirect routes to make the NAS available beyond my router out on the internet, just in case I need it when I'm, for instance, at a user group meeting in Fairfax City, which is 8 or 10 air miles away. Now, for Fairfax City, for the presentations I do and the other files I provide for my user group, I put those on Google Drive so that I can access them from there. But I was toying with the idea of accessing my NAS. And basically the only gotcha I found is that I can't set up the NAS when it is connected directly to the router to be accessible from outside my network. If that's what you want to accomplish, you have to connect your NAS a different way. And that means spending a lot more money because your NAS will have to have an Ethernet socket built into it. So I spent, what, $60 to get my Samsung 500 gig SSD, something like that. And I think to buy a minimal NAS with NAS RAID with an Ethernet port on it, so it got its own IP address, and then I could configure the router to provide access to it through SMB. I think that would be closer to $300. So no, I haven't spent that money.
Okay. Can you connect a cell phone to your router for emergency network internet access if your main service goes down?
I'm not sure what, do you mean if the cell tower goes down? Is that the gist of the question?
Well, sometimes I have a VoIP Spectrum phone, and if my electricity goes out, it's deader than, everything's deader than a doornail.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so let's suppose the electricity goes out and your router is down because it's powered by electricity. So you've got network service on your phone from the cell tower. And yes, at least in my case, my contract with my carrier company allows me to connect my phone either by Wi-Fi or its own built-in Wi-Fi or by USB, which by the way is the better connection. It's faster and it keeps your phone charged. Connected to my laptop with its battery power, and then I've got internet service on my laptop through what's called USB tethering. And that gives you the fastest possible service given what's going on in your cell tower. It will not be as fast as a good internet connection to your router, but it will be something. And yes, that can be done. I've done it.
Which is preferable for data storage, NAS or a server?
I'm not sure how to answer that, and I'll tell you why. Server implies that it's outside of your home, outside of your network, which means it's cloud storage. I think I've already answered that question, and that is that NAS, although in my case, due to financial limitations, I haven't bought a huge NAS by my standards. NAS is faster. And to me, between that and the fact that it's more secure than cloud storage, I consider that the way to go. Now, if I admit I only know a couple of people who I can characterize in this fashion, they have servers in their home. And in that case, server may be a faster option than using your router with a NAS. You attach a NAS, use your server as a NAS, just like we used Novell in the old days to store files for sharing. But in general, if you're talking about a server outside of your network, I think there's no question that NAS is better in terms of speed and security.
If you want to scan and secure important documents to a NAS, how do you avoid opening that to a network, i.e. birth certificate, deed to property, driver's license, passport, etc.?
Wow. Well, okay. First of all, if you have important documents and you want to secure them, probably you need to start with encrypting the folder in which they're stored. Windows has a compression mechanism built into it for compacting files that are in a given folder. I can't recall if it has, I've never used it. I can't recall if it allows you to assign a password, but definitely there are mechanisms available from third-party software packages that will allow you to encrypt folders. And I would, if you want to store the documents on your NAS, I definitely put them in an encrypted folder. But beyond that, I can't claim to be an expert on that stuff. I do understand the basic functionings of asymmetric encryption, but I can't swear to you that there's a really secure technique other than using asymmetric encryption itself, which is what we call military grade or bank grade security. So you pick the solution that best fits your needs, but definitely encrypting folder, particularly if you want a mix of unsecure and secure stuff on a NAS, you definitely need to encrypt at the folder level.
Okay. This is coming from John, go ahead.
I was just going to say that sometimes I think people get a word confused between network and internet and local area network and the wide area network, because I think John said that if he has stuff on his NAS, he can't get it to it from outside his local network. So, you know, if the person was asking internet, well, the NAS doesn't go out.
Right.
If it's just inside, well, it's your material, it's your computer, it's your network. So it really, you know, doesn't matter as much.
Yeah. Well, if you're in a situation like I was in a year or two ago when my son was bringing his friends in to entertain them, we built a nice patio out back, and he put up he had a nice table with a collapsible awning over it, and he had friends over a couple nights a week. And yeah, you know, they're the internet generation. They all have these devices in their pockets that they use to connect to things. In that case, yeah, there's a definite sort of security issue worth considering. But now that I'm living by myself, as long as I can make sure people can't come in through my router and from the outside. I don't know if my son gave away the password to the Wi-Fi, but as long as I can now prevent people from coming in through the router to explore the NAS, I think I'm in good shape. And that probably means I ought to change the Wi-Fi password.
I would definitely do that. You can't trust your kids. This is coming from a Samsung phone. I can connect to my files on my phone. Could I not also connect to the NAS remotely via the phone?
Short answer is no, because the port for SMB is not open on your router.
Thank you. Can you make your NAS files and folders available on your router to remote users?
All right. And that's closely tied to the prior question. The basic answer is if the NAS is connected to the USB port on the router, I have tried and tried and tried, and I cannot make it visible to the outside world. If it's connected anywhere else on your network, so it has an IP address other than that of your router, it is possible to make it visible to the outside world. The extent to which you want to make that knowledge public once you open that port on your router is up to you. Personally, I am never going to do that. And I'll tell you why. When I was doing that audio streaming from VLC on my desktop computer back in December, I figured out how to open up a port on my router so I could access that stream while I'm driving around in my car through the cell phone network. But that meant opening a port on my router. Now, here's the consequence of opening that port. About 3 times a day, I got a notification from Norton on my desktop computer that it had blocked access from various malware type operations that were scanning my router's ports, found the port open, and attempted to come in. 3 times a day. The reason they came into the desktop computer every time is because I told my router, when you get a request on this port, forward it to this computer. And on the computer, I opened up the firewall so that VLC would accept the request, except that Norton examined the request and realized they weren't requests for music streaming, and it blocked them, but it also told me and blocked them. So what did I learn from that? There are all sorts of bad actors out there who run applications to scan the ports on your router to find open ports. And you better be aware of it. I certainly am now.
This is a follow-up to the question that John helped answer. If you scan your material to go into the NAS, does it get into the network, no matter which one, to get it to an encrypted folder? Can you scan documents you want to keep secured directly to the NAS?
Okay, I'm gonna qualify this. The short answer is yes. You say you want to keep secure. that implies that it's not necessarily secured instantly. If you want it secured instantly, the only way you can do it is scan it to an encrypted folder on your computer to which the scanner is attached. Yes, you can encrypt the folder once you have put files in it on the NAS, and maybe you can copy an encrypted folder from your computer to your NAS so it's encrypted during the transmission. I haven't tried it. So you have to be very careful how you parse these questions, because there's a difference between secure instantly versus secure when I take the necessary actions in the future. And that's a significant difference.
Western Dig has My Cloud Personal Cloud available in various sizes. That would be an external hard drive that are inexpensive. For instance, a 6 terabyte is $239 from Best Buy. What are your thoughts?
$239 for what time frame?
$239 for a 6 terabyte external hard drive.
I don't know. I haven't looked at the prices. I know that the last time I walked through Micro Center, they had 8 terabyte drives from at least Seagate and maybe some of the other manufacturers, Western Digital, or I've forgotten who the other ones are. Depends what you have to do with them. Keep this phrase in mind and its implications: putting all your eggs in one basket. I hate putting all my eggs in one basket. Now I keep shooting, my collection of digital photos keeps growing because I keep shooting digital photos. So I instead of buying a new hard drive in place of the old one, I simply buy inexpensive 2 terabyte hard drives, and every time I need another set, I buy another set and I add the new photographs to that. So one set covers this number of years, another set covers the next number of years. But I'll be darned if I will ever put all my eggs in one basket. It's just too risky. And I might add that 2 times in my life, I've had hard drives die because I didn't have enough air circulation in the computer. They got too hot. One time I paid for data recovery. I will never do that again. It was painful.
Anything.
And it taught me a lesson. Mm-hmm. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting how you say about your photos on your external hard drives. When I was teaching adults stuff with the SD cards, and I'd say, you know, have that as your backup. Just, you know, when you're on the trip to Hoo-Hawville and you've got your SD cards, 1 or more, just keep those, put those away, label them, and then save them someplace else. But that's your backup. Interesting. I am going to ask Gabe Goldberg to please unmute himself and expand on his comment in here, because if I just read it, nobody's going to know what I'm talking about.
Do you mean the shields up comment?
Yeah, yeah. Talk about grc.com.
When John was talking about ports and evil people on the internet scanning for vulnerabilities, one of the ways to protect yourself, go to grc.com, Gibson Research Corporation.com, and run the Shields Up test. It's safe to run it. And what it will do is probe your computer, your router, your systems to make sure that ports that should not be open are not open. And if everything is secure the way it's supposed to be, I forget what the cheery message is, but you'll get a congratulations telling you how secure you are.
Yep.
And if it finds anything that's open, it will tell you about that, and then you can look into it. So it's sort of like checking your doors and windows being locked before you go on vacation. It just makes sure that there's no way, even the kitty door, the doggy door, is locked so that raccoons can't come in while you're away. It's a worthwhile thing to do every now and then, especially on a new computer. You don't have to, this is not a daily, weekly, even monthly, but certainly on a new computer, or if you move things around or put in a new router, it's just a useful safety check that just takes a minute or two.
I used to do that every every semester, there theoretically 3 semesters a year in adult ed for a gazillion years, because I taught for over 20. And there was always an open port. I would report it to the IT department. They had no clue what I was talking about. They finally, after year of me doing that, hired somebody that knew what I was talking about and closed that port. But it took me forever. And it was so sad that the old lady adult ed tech teacher knew no more than the IT people did. And I thought, that's education for you. Over to Steve Parker.
Mr. Parker, go ahead.
Yeah, it's called stealth mode. When you get, when it goes through all green and it says all your ports are not just closed, but they're not detectable either. And it looks as though there's nothing attached to any of those ports. And then it says, congratulations, you're in stealth mode. That's.
Yep, or you have a little one little red box that's open.
I happened to run an updated version of Norton that showed up on my desktop computer yesterday, and it did do open port detection on my router. It found, now I admit at the time I wasn't in a position to really explore this in detail, but it did find 5 open ports in my router, and that was 5 more than I expected. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to look into it and find out what those ports are used for. But I suspect something like Gabe described or what Steve Parker described would be very valuable. But I can suggest another thing that people might want to consider: turning your router off. If you don't need the internet at certain times of day, turn your router off. It won't be detected from the outside. Nobody will be able to intrude into your network from that router, because your network won't exist when your router is turned off. So keep that in mind too, particularly if you're going on vacation and you do not have any reason to allow anybody to use your network while you're gone. Turn your router off.
Interesting. This is my last call for questions. I have no more in the Q&A. So if you have a question, raise your hand just like Kurt did. That's in reactions if you don't know where raise your hand is. And do not underline, shouting, put any more questions in the chat box because it's closed.
Okay, I put a comment in earlier. If you're going to set up a RAID environment, the first thing to do is determine what kind of RAID do you want. Do you want to do it because you want to improve performance, or you might do striping? Do you want to do it because you want backup, in which case I believe it's RAID 0. You might want to do RAID, sometimes called RAID 10. It's actually 1 plus 0, okay? Or RAID 5 because you have fault tolerance, okay? End of that comment. Now,
I want to comment on that. You've hit on a point that probably deserves its own presentation, because there are so many ways to configure a RAID device. Some of the devices you buy off the shelf may not literally support all of those different ways, but understanding what they do and what they accomplish for you is probably the subject of a book. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a RAID for dummies out there. I haven't looked for it, but RAID is a tremendously complicated RAID administration and RAID configuration. Very, very complicated subject. I am not saying that nobody on this Zoom meeting would understand it. I think I would have a shot at understanding it, but I think, and it can be understood, there's no doubt about it, but it is not something that you buy off the shelf and just plug in and expect it to accomplish everything you want it to accomplish. You have to do some RAID configuration.
Should I put that on a list of, gee, we'd like to have one of those presentations sometimes?
I'd recommend it, but I will tell you, I'm
And
not going
there
to spend that
are,
money anytime soon.
There are Raid for Dummies books out there. I just looked and I found at least 4 almost instantly.
Yep.
Mr. Trout, carry on.
Okay. NAS, network addressable storage, implies a server function. Whether it's in your router or in another device, doesn't make any difference. You have a client-server relationship there. Okay. So the distinction is somewhat, it's one of semantics. Not all routers support network attached storage. So if you want to do that, and if you don't want to tie yourself into a particular router or router manufacturer, then there's nothing to stop you from taking and using sort of last week's topic, a Raspberry Pi, to take and build your own storage server. I have a friend, he's not present with us today, a Mac user that runs a time machine server on a Raspberry Pi that his Macs talk to on a regular basis. And there are lots of ways you can do that with a Raspberry Pi and connect it to whatever IO farm you want, is probably as long as it's USB. But you can easily do that. So
Thank you.
everybody can do that, regardless of the router that they're running with.
And any comments that are in the chat box will be included in the follow-up email that I send out to everybody, plus any links that are in the chat box. That's just automatically, but I think we have some people here who haven't been to one of our Wednesday workshops before that realize what all they're getting in the follow-up message. Dale, you're on.
This might be sort of a dumb question.
They're not dumb questions. They're clarifying questions.
I was saying that they said to turn off your router. It might be a good idea if you're on vacation or you're going to be away for a long time and you're not using it. I was wondering, is there a way for them to get into your router, and if you have like an automatic connect, they can get into a port and do something? And somehow get back, back, what do you want? Get back backwards.
That may depend on which brand and model of router that you buy, but I think the short answer is if there's a port open, yes.
Do you have a very strong password that you changed?
No, it's the password that came with the modem.
Oh, well, you're open to the whole free world then.
Okay.
The first thing you do when you get any device like that is you create your own, don't fall over, John, okay? As you create your own very strong password, write it down in 13 places so you don't lose it. And, change the username because they all ship with kind of the same thing, and everybody, and it's all posted out on the internet. So after your Glendora meeting today, Dale, that's your job.
Okay.
To change your router username and password.
And we had a different one that says how to get into the router to do that.
Right. If you want to know how, send an email to bjames@apcug.org. and he will send you the steps on exactly how to do that.
All right. There's a couple other things that I think I need to mention about this nomenclature business. Routers come with a default name for their Wi-Fi service. Most of my neighbors have changed their Wi-Fi default name to the name of the family. That's horribly, horribly insecure. Particularly if they are still using the default password for the Wi-Fi. Do not change your name of your router to reflect your family name or any individual person's first name. Also, if the router name has the name of the brand in it, don't include the brand name in the router name, change it to something else. What you want to do is make it as anonymous as possible for anybody in the outside world who's driving around with a Wi-Fi scanner app trying to find a place that they can break into electronically. Don't help them. Don't put your family name or your first name or anybody's first name in the router name, and don't use the default router name or the name of the router maker in that Wi-Fi SSID, that Wi-Fi network name. Very bad practice.
He sometimes thinks it's kind of fun to see what everybody has called their devices.
Yes.
Some are extremely laughable.
I admit. And I probably won't use this one, but I've been considering changing the name of my Wi-Fi network to, oh, why is my Fi?
Very good. Over to Jack. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is regarding turning off the router. If you turn off your router, like you say, will you still have access to your computer remotely? Would you be able to call into your computer like when you travel to access a file?
No.
No.
Take the files with you.
Yeah. Save them in the cloud. Sync them.
Okay, so you can't access your computer or anything connected to your router, like the programming for the TV. My network is UVerse. So if I travel and my router is connected with my UVerse service, then I cannot access my UVerse because of my router is turned off. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You
Okay.
also can't access any of your Internet of Things devices. You can't close your garage door. You can't change your thermostat. You can't read that. You can't control your lights, on and on and on.
And you just hope for the best that that's all still working.
Judy, I hate to say it, but
Thank
I'm
you.
going to have to take a break for a moment. I'll come back, but
Sure. Over to Carol.
too much of this.
You're on.
Okay, somebody mentioned the WD My Cloud home device. Just one precaution there. The newer, I have a WD Cloud NAS that I've had for several years, and I'm getting a little nervous because I'm concerned it might be reaching the end of life. So I've been looking for some new solutions. But with the NAS, the WD Cloud NAS I currently have, I can access it via IP address internally on my network. I've seen comments on Amazon with the My Cloud home devices that it is not directly accessible by IP address, that you actually have to install a Western Digital app on your computer, and then you map the drive through that app. So you might want to look at that. I personally am a little concerned about not being able to access it directly and what it means for security and other things by having to access it through their NAS or through their app instead of being able to directly access it by IP address.
I apologize for making you all wait.
Thank you. No problem.
I caught a bacterial infection a couple of weeks ago, so I'm on antibiotics, and I have to use the elixir of life, otherwise known as Coca-Cola, so I'm my usual live wire self.
Okay, and Carol answered a question, and it was my bad because when the question came in about the Western Digit 236, my assumption was external hard drive, not. I didn't even think that he was talking about a NAS. Over to Bill James, you're on.
Yes, Carol, I was the one that asked that question, and I was just looking at those, and I think you're correct. I haven't done any more research. I was just kind of shopping based on the comments, but I thought the price was attractive, the reason why I was looking at it. And I have another comment. Since I rely on my home automation, if you have as Kurt said, if you're involved with Internet of Things, you can't really turn off your router and still be connected to those devices, such as your thermostat and your garage and all of that. So you have to kind of have some caution if you're considering turning off your router. Make sure that you have access to your door locks and everything else, because those are all connected to your Wi-Fi.
And please do remember that Mr. James in his presentations always says you need to reboot your router and your modem just like you do your computer. So think about doing that at a minimum of once a month, once every other week, something like that. But just don't forget to do that. Do we have any more questions?
I would like to comment on what Bill said. Notice that he said he needed to access the door locks, or at least check the status of the door locks and the garage door when he's outside of his network. So that's why the router has to stay on. But what that implies is the router has at least one port open to allow those activities on his phone or his tablet to happen when he is outside of his network. Keep that in mind, that when you take advantage of those technologies, you've got a port open on your router.
Not necessarily.
All right, Mr. Trout, I knew some expert would chime in. Please go ahead.
Okay, if you have an application running on a device inside of your network, it can communicate with a service external to your network without you having any ports open other than the typical 80 and 443. Because what's happening is you connect to a service, your devices connect to a service provided typically by a vendor.
This actually is a scenario a lot like a Zoom meeting, because we're all connected to each other through Zoom servers. Mr. Trout's absolutely right. So what happens there is that there's either a continuous connection between the app running on your network that he described and the external server system, or there is a frequent, gee, is there any new information request going out from the app on your inside your network to that remote server system, one of those two. And the result is when Bill connects to the server from his phone, not to his house, but to his server, then the server, when asked, is there any new information, will tell the app inside the house, yes, there is. And that way they can establish communication. And that does not necessarily mean there's a port open, just as Mr. Trout said.
And you can call me Kurt, please.
Yeah.
Thank you. I did
You know what
I
the
did not
problem
know
is?
that.
Your
Yeah.
last name is so close to mine, and my middle name is Curtis, so I have a tough
Oh, God.
time.
Do you have one or two S's? One. Kurt has two.
Nope.
Anyway, I just went to grc.com and did the Shields Up test, and it says the equipment at this target IP address, in all caps bold, did not respond to our UPnP probes. That's good news. So check it out, you guys. It's easy to do. Kevin, you're on.
Yes, Kurt, on the types of applications you would be using where you would be able to connect to a server outside of your home network, aren't you implying that that system in your house is actually being connected to, for example, a cell phone tower in order to get around your home router? You're muted.
I'm sorry. No, it's going to go through my home router.
If it's physically powered off, it's not going anywhere.
That's right. That was the whole point, which says that if you turn off your router, okay, then your Ring thermostat
Right, I get it.
is not going to be queryable from your phone while you're on vacation.
I thought you said that if the router was turned off, there were apps that were available to get to you when you are remotely traveling.
You misunderstood what I said.
Okay.
Okay, what I said was the fact that you can connect to these services does not necessarily mean that you have an external port open in your router. And the router that we're talking about here is that one that's provided by your internet service provider. Now, one of the things that John Krout does, I believe, okay, is he has his own router, which is now connected to that internet service provider. Okay, and he's talking about doing things on his router.
Right.
And the ports that are open that we're worried about are not on his router, because that's behind his internet service provider's router. Okay, and when we probe our ports, what's happening is they're taking our upstream, our internet IP address and probing that from another server.
The internet service provider's IP.
Yes.
Yeah, most of that business we gloss over because possibly it's passing through multiple servers, depending on how the external guy is connected to the internet. It could be coming through a dozen. Some of them functioning as routers, but definitely there's a big box about 4 houses away from my house that is the optical router provided by FiOS. And for some reason, the neighbors complained, and it's 20 feet up above the street. Most FiOS routers are at the 4-foot level. So every time they come over here to adjust that router, they have to bring a ladder truck. But the routers exist, and optical routers are horribly complicated and very expensive. But that's what FiOS uses because they're optical all the way from their central server system into the wall on the outside of my house. And I have what's called an optical network terminal that converts the optical to Cat 6 coming into my house. Cat 6 is a type of Ethernet that's pretty high speed.
Thank you.
And I'm jealous.
Look, yes, my question is about the internet frequency. Some they come with 2,500, some they come with 5,000, and some of the routers come with both. What is your recommendation on how do we use it? I've heard some of the 5,000 you cannot use it in home, but 2,500 you can use it in home, make the connection. So I'm not sure about. Need some explanation on that, please. Thank you.
Well, I don't have a tremendous expertise in Wi-Fi. And to be honest, of all the devices that are in my home, only my phone and my tablet are connected by Wi-Fi. When my son was here, there were a few other things he had that were connected by Wi-Fi. The point of using multiple bands, multiple frequency ranges in Wi-Fi is that if your neighbors are using one of the bands, or you have multiple neighbors and they end up clogging one of the bands, your router can switch to the other so that you have relatively uncluttered band of radio signals to use for Wi-Fi. And I think that's an advantage if you intend to use Wi-Fi heavily. I do not. So everything that I have that for instance, I use for watching Netflix or Amazon Prime Video, that's connected by Ethernet.
And Spectrum told me that's the only way I could get good stuff here where I live. Counterpoint rebuttal from Kurt.
Okay. no router is going to automatically switch between 2.4 gig and 5 gig. Okay, they may put up an SSID on both of them. You can use the same SSID on both of them. Okay, you may have if you've got it configured that way, you may have devices that choose to connect to the strongest signal that they see. Now, when we're talking about radio transmission, the higher the frequency, typically, the faster we can transmit data on it. Okay, from that standpoint, something running on the 5 gig band is better, okay, than something running on a 2.4 gig band. Not all devices work on 5 gig. And the physics, I should say, characteristics are such that as the frequency goes up, the range, for one reason or another, tends to go down. 2.4 gigahertz signals will penetrate walls better than 5 gigahertz signals. Okay, so it's good to have a mix of both. If you have a device that can and you have the network, if you've got a device that you can connect to the 5 gigahertz side, then by all means do it. Throughput is better there. Okay, it's still probably going to be limited by the speed of your internet connection from your home to your internet service provider. So I hope that's answered the question.
Yes. John Kennedy.
Swing down. As an example for what Kurt's saying on that, the house I live in was a small house that they expanded to include the breezeway that went out to the garage and a room in the back. So the original house is all big brick block stuff. But the one room that's could be called a sunroom, playroom, is technically outside that area. The 5 point doesn't get me back to my range extender, which I have, but I have to switch to the 2.5 for that very reason, that it will penetrate through to that extender. So that's, like Kurt was saying, you do it based on what you need to do. I would rather have the 5 for the speed, but it's not getting through that cement block. So the 2.5, that gets me through.
Mustafa. Unmute, please.
Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you, Kurt, and thank you, John, for the info. The other question I have here is, if the neighbor come with a higher frequency, does it kind of suppress my frequency at 2500 or make my internet weaker or not? That one, I don't know. I just kind of have a concern about that.
It really depends on how far your neighbor is from your location. If you're talking about an apartment house, you're really, you don't have many options for speeding things up. But if you're talking about a neighbor that's 100 feet away in a subdivision, yeah, I think you stand some chance of being able to speed things up using the techniques that you have mentioned. I want to mention also that when you are considering buying a router with the latest hot Wi-Fi 6 built in, keep in mind that you have to match your router Wi-Fi for optimum performance. You have to match your Wi-Fi behavior to your portable device behavior. If you've got an 8-year-old phone, it is not going to support Wi-Fi 6, no matter how much money you spend on your router. And likewise, if you have a hot new iPhone that supports Wi-Fi 6 and 5G, and you spend money on, and you're sitting there with an 8-year-old router that doesn't even run 802.11n, probably not worth buying that new phone and expecting it to do any better on your old Wi-Fi. You have to match the two.
Carol Picard, do you want to jump in with anything?
I just had, John, when you were setting up that external drive as a USB to your router, and talking about security, was there an option to password protect at that point?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yes, you can do that. Okay. I didn't, because my judgment was on my network and my situation, it wasn't required. That doesn't mean everybody's in the same boat. I understand that.
Okay, because there were some security questions earlier, and I just wanted to make sure people understood that they would have the option of adding security at that level. And on my router, I have another option that I can activate a guest network, and devices that are logged in or connected, I should say, to the guest network cannot see other devices. So when somebody comes over and wants to have access to the internet, I set them up with a password to the guest network, and that way I am not as concerned about them being able to access my specific devices.
Thank you, Carol. That's what I meant, but you said it so much more clear than I did. Too cool. John Kennedy.
Yeah, well, Mustafa's other question really was about the neighbors, as we didn't mention, besides the 2.5 and the 5, you've got the channels within each. So he would need to use like an app that I have on my phone to find out who's running on which channel and try to find one that's not close to what they're using, and that'll improve your signal too.
Over to Steve.
Yeah, the other thing is the channel bandwidth. With the 2.4, you've only got 11 channels. With the 5 gigahertz band, you've got up to 60 channels.
For all
and I might add that impacts more than you might think. Aside from having a cell tower a block away from my home, I had an FM station a block away from my home. When we first bought a van that had one of those key fobs that would open the doors on the van with motors, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Because the FM station was interfering. And after 3 different changes of the available bands on that key fob and the car dealer literally parked the car in the lot of the FM station and kept changing the bands until they found one that worked. So this is a problem that has existed for ages and will continue to exist where people live close together.
Bill James, do you want to jump back in with anything?
No, I think someone addressed
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, any other comments? Or we are gone, because you see, I have a 12 o'clock meeting, okay? And it's on Zoom.
And I've got to pick up grandkids pretty soon.
The important things in life here. And I want to thank John Krout so very much for all of the knowledge he gave us today. A lot of it I understood, which is always way cool. And for Kurt and Steve and Bill and John, the other John, all your comments, Carol, clarification is always wonderful, and especially from a different point of view. And at the Southwest Conference in San Diego, we had 2 Judys. So I was JJT, my initials, and the other one was TOJ, the other Judy.
Yeah.
Over to you, Mr. Kennedy.
Yep. And I'd like to say thank you to John, of course, but to also let people know who've been coming to our workshops, make sure you go and do some of this stuff, because thanks to Kurt, after last week, sitting right over here is my headless Pi, and it's running Pi-hole. And thanks to John, I'm going to tonight maybe go over and plug a thumb drive into my router and get it going, or plug thumb drives into that Pi. So 2 weeks in a row, I'm getting a lot of my money's worth. if you have ideas for either presenting or ideas of what you'd like to hear in a presentation, please let us know. We're in the process of filling up June and July, but we've got a couple of 5-week months coming up, so we may be short a presentation or two. Please share with us, email, either Judy or me, doesn't matter, and give us some ideas and offer to do some of these presentations. We really appreciate the people who have been the first timers and John, who's been a routine regular. So this ends May, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks, starting with our June, and then run through 3 workshops in June, and then at least 3 in July. Thank you so much. Benefits of membership of APCUG. Judy?
I have people booked into August.
Great. Okay, so we had a drop when we thought we weren't going to have any, so all of a sudden Judy finally gets some people to do it. So please join us and please give us other ideas. Other than that, thank you so much. Have a good afternoon. Have a good last few days of May. Unofficial start of summer comes on Monday. Everybody have a safe holiday weekend.
You too. Thank you so much for everything.
You're welcome.
Remember the reason